This is the general election element 1 about the types of elections and the general election season itself. And as far as types of elections, there's really only 3 types of elections in America today. The first type of election is the primary season, or the primary elections, where a political party is just trying to choose what candidate they want to run for office. Whoever wins in the primaries is the candidate of that party, as you know. The second type of election would be the general election, where the champions, if you will, of each party run against each other to decide who's actually going to win the office. But then there's a third type of election, and that is just a policy election. Elections designed for the public to participate in the policy-making process. The first type of policy election is called the referendum, whereby voters are given the chance to approve or disapprove some legislative act or bond issue or a constitutional amendment that's proposed by the legislature of the state. The second type of policy election is called the initiative petition, which typically requires citizens proposing a law to gain signatures equal to 10% of the number of voters in the previous election. But the elections that the American public typically pays the most attention to are the primary and general elections. Now remember, as you take a look at our 2 mud-covered candidates here from all the mudslinging that has happened, they have each survived the primary rounds. Remember, in the primaries, the Democrats were campaigning against other Democrats to see which one of them would last and eventually become the champion of their party. Remember, the primary season lasted from January to late July, early August. Meanwhile, the Republicans, the GOP, Grand Old Party, they were going through the exact same process, trying to pick their champion and decide who was going to run for president for them. Well, once that primary season ends, you then have them meet in the general election, which takes place on the Tuesday after the first Monday of November. In other words, basically the first Tuesday of November, unless that Tuesday is November 1st, or if you want to say it this way, unless the Monday right before it is Halloween, if that makes sense. Think about that for a second. The general election is when candidates run against each other after they've won their own party's nomination. And if you're a political science geek like I am, then Election Tuesday might as well be the Super Bowl. It is a big, big night. The public is out there making their predictions. Everybody's trying to figure out who the president is going to be in the early hours as the polls are just becoming open. There's constant round-the-clock coverage of how the election is going and who's winning what states and how this drama is going to unfold. And eventually, at the end of the night, there's going to be a major event where the newly elected or re-elected president is going to approach the stage with his family right here, meet with the vice presidential candidate, and set things up for all the cheering supporters so they can give the big speech and congratulate themselves and their supporters on the big victory. They'll wave to the crowds, the bands will be playing, the celebration will begin for another 4 years, or the first 4 years. Meanwhile, according to presidential election tradition, the one who lost will contact the winning candidate by phone, congratulate him on a race well fought, accept his condolences from the victor, and then meet before his supporters to give what's called his concession speech, as he tells his people that they fought a good fight, but now it's time to rally behind the newly elected leader. At that point, 8 months of hard work are over, and you're kind of just left scratching your head wondering what you should do next, or if you should run again, while your supporters listen to your concession speech and pay you the proper tribute. But one of the biggest misconceptions about Election Tuesday is that it's only for presidential candidates and that it's only a big deal to them. In fact, there are tons of races across the country going on in Election Tuesday. For example, control of the Senate, as you see down here, or Colorado governor, as you see right here. These can be as big a deal as the presidential election can be, particularly when the Senate or the House of Representatives is the one making the laws. A president, when they get elected, if they don't have their party in control of Congress, really can't plan on getting much done. But again, the basic idea is that it's a big night for a lot of people. Not only U.S. presidents get elected on Election Tuesday, but senators get elected as well, as do U.S. House Representatives, state governors, mayors of major cities like Chicago, small town mayors, and all sorts of offices, state House of Representatives, state senate, county drain commissioner, sometimes even school board, everything in between. Virtually every office in America gets elected on Election Tuesday. And therefore, it's not just a big deal for the bigwigs, it's a big deal for everybody involved, including one of the most overlooked offices. While the American people are busy electing the leader of the free world, somebody still has to be elected mayor of Washington, D.C. itself. But again, of course, the election that everyone pays the most attention to is President of the United States. And the campaign season for that general election takes place from the end of the conventions in, like, say, mid-August, all the way up to early November. And during that time, these two guys right here, like they did back in 2012, are going to go after each other with every campaign tactic that they have, because they've already been crowned the champions of their respective political parties. Now it's time for them to battle each other and win the office. And so, from August of an election year until November of an election year, there are going to be 3 presidential debates. Now, presidential debates have long been a part of American political history, but it's only been relatively recently, 1960, when we had the first ever televised presidential debate, with John F. Kennedy on the right and Richard Nixon on the left. Now, in the true spirit of American politics, Nixon and Kennedy were very cordial with each other before the debate, knowing full well that they were there to do a job. The debate itself went very well as both candidates expressed their policies and beliefs and attacked each other on the issues. And then afterward, as is presidential tradition, respected each other enough to shake each other's hands and say, very nicely done, well debated points, great debate. Now, most of those traditions have still continued, including the idea that there are going to be 3 presidential debates between August and November, 3 times when the 2 candidates are going to spar with each other on the issues. According to debate tradition, there's going to be the 2 candidates plus a moderator, this guy in the middle here, who's flipping the coin to determine which one of them is going to get the first question. From this point on, it's the moderator that controls the action and runs the debate to make sure both candidates are going to get equal time and their appropriate opportunities to respond to what the other one says. Now, in presidential elections, and frankly in some of the smaller ones too, in debate history there are 3 methods that can typically be used: the traditional method, the town hall method, and the sit-down method. The traditional method is the one we're the most familiar with 2 candidates on a stage opposing each other, each one standing behind a podium with the moderator in the middle asking the questions. Now, due to the fact that the candidates are pretty much far apart, these debates tend to be a little bit more civil and not as contentious as some of the other methods, even though points are going to be raised and arguments are going to be had. The second method is called the town hall method for debate, in which case an audience is basically there in very close proximity to the candidates, and questions come directly from the audience. One candidate will sit down on a chair or a bar stool of some sort while the other candidate talks to the crowd, and then when that candidate's time is up for speaking, the other candidate will get his chance to address the question. Now, the idea here is that the other candidate is supposed to wait until the one whose turn it is gets done speaking their piece, but that doesn't always happen. Town hall debates are a little bit tougher to control because sometimes the candidate will just pop up and start interrupting the one who's speaking. Those conversations can get kind of escalated because they're in such close proximity to the crowd, they have to get their attention and they have to get their vote. So town hall debates can often get a little bit more intense. The finger pointing can get out of hand sometimes as the both candidates try to maintain their composure while at the same time trying to get their point across. And as you can imagine, it can be very difficult for the moderator to keep control of things. But the method that seems to generate the most ratings and have the most intensive impact is the sit-down debate, where both candidates will sit down at a table very close to each other, and they'll sit right about maybe 2-3 feet away from a moderator. So everybody's in really close proximity, and this is where emotions can run really high. But before and after the debate, as it is in debate tradition, both candidates will shake hands in the spirit of American democracy, be willing to listen to each other's ideas, and thank them for giving them a spirited discussion and discourse and debate on those issues. Afterward, they'll take a wave to the crowd. They'll go to the crowd and shake some hands. And then both families will approach the stage, not just to congratulate their loved one, but also shake hands and show good sportsmanship to the opponent on the other side who was just yelling at their husband or their wife just a minute ago. Now, if you'll notice here, this is a different set of candidates. This is Paul Ryan, and that's because there aren't just 3 presidential debates during the general election season. There's also 1 vice presidential debate. The 2 vice presidents, when they have their debate, will usually even come forward with a lot more spirit and intensity than even the presidential candidates did, because they don't have 3 chances. They only have the 1 opportunity to make themselves look good on national television. In 2012, Vice President Joe Biden and his Republican challenger, Paul Ryan, chose to do a sit-down debate as their one-debate method. And of course, in this proximity being so close, the debate can get kind of intense as they make their points, argue with the other candidate, and sometimes both of them might even have a problem with the moderator. While some very interested people watch from across America, including the president, sitting in Air Force One here, trying to make sure that his vice president doesn't screw up the upcoming election for him. But what about third-party candidates? What impact can they have? I mean, after all, they're really just interest groups with a candidate to elect. I mean, they really are concentrated on just their own issue and really nobody else's issue. Well, for the most part, Republican and Democratic parties dominate the general election, and they're usually not very close elections. So the impact of a third-party candidate, unless you're Teddy Roosevelt in 1912, getting 27% of the popular vote and 88 electoral college votes, can be pretty slim. But in close elections, it can make a pretty significant difference, because what minor parties do is they take votes away from major parties that have similar ideologies to them. Take a look here in the 2000 election. Al Gore and George Bush were very, very close coming into the closing hours of the presidential race, 48 million apiece, roughly. But a Green Party candidate, Ralph Nader, took 2.5 million votes away from Al Gore, because the Democrats are more about the environment. Libertarian candidates took votes away from George Bush. Constitution candidates took votes away from George Bush. Natural law took votes away from the Republicans as well. But you also had socialist workers' parties, Socialist Party, Workers' World parties that took votes away from the Democrats because of the higher tax issues, and libertarians who took votes away from the Republicans as well. If this party, or if this election would have been down to just those 2 political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, and the third parties had stayed out of it, who knows how it would have turned out. But we don't want to rain on the parade too much here. The biggest thing to remember is that the general election season is very important. And as you can see here in this slide, it's a big, big deal for everyone. That's it. Thanks for listening.